Angela was raising a young son on her own. 3 years ago, she was going to marry Morgan, but shortly before the wedding, after hearing about her unexpected pregnancy, the groom literally threw the young woman out to the street. He explained everything in a simple way. "I have met another woman, and I want to marry her." Angela tried to talk to him, but all she got in response was insults. "Who do you think you are? Get out of my house and go back to your dorm. Were you going to live off me? And you were going to pin another man's child on me? I know everything. My mother told me that she saw you with your lover." Angela looked at Morgan in horror and could not believe how he could change so much. After all, she had known him quite different, gentle and kind. The girl gathered her few belongings and left. She felt so disgusted, as if she were covered in mud from head to toe. Down the stairs she met Morgan's mother, Mrs. Brown. The woman gave Angela a contemptuous look and squeezed her lips squeamishly, and without saying hello, she slightly moved aside to let her pass and continued on her way. Angela had to go back to the dormitory, where she hardly managed to get a room. All the money she could earn was spent on things for the baby, so she had to deny herself everything and even cut down on food. After the baby was born, whom she named Sam, she was asked to find new housing and move out of the dormitory. In desperation, Angela began to look through all the ads in the city and finally found one that was fitting her very much. A lonely elderly man was in need of a nurse with accommodation, and Angela immediately went to the specified address. The elderly man agreed to accommodate the woman with the child, but allocated her the smallest room. For more than 2 years, the young woman cared for the bedridden man, trying to brighten his last days. She spoon-fed him, helped him take a shower, gave him the necessary medicine, and at the same time had time to take care of her own son, which took a lot of energy. When the old man passed away, Angela organized a funeral. Fortunately, the elderly man had saved money for this in advance. 10 days passed, and Angela began to prepare to move. She was sure that heirs would soon be found, and indeed one morning the doorbell rang. But it brought such good news that Angela could not believe her ears. The kind elderly man had made her his heir and bequeathed the apartment to his caring nurse. When exactly he did it, Angela did not know, but an elderly neighbour, Mrs. Williams, who was a friend of the elderly man, said that it had happened about half a year after Angela had moved in with him. Angela cried with happiness. After a while, Sam started going to kindergarten, and Angela managed to get a job in a sewing factory, where, after a month of probation, she proved to be a skillful and conscientious worker. She finally was happy because now she was free and independent. One night, the woman felt a sharp pain in her stomach, so severe that she could hardly breathe or think. Realizing that it was bad, Angela called an ambulance and, barely hanging on her feet, went to a neighbour. But there was silence at the door, and Angela just remembered that Mrs. Williams had gone to the summer house in the morning. She rang the other doors, but no one answered. A young man opened the door. Angela had seen him several times. They even greeted each other. Angela grabbed his arm and dragged him behind her. "Where are you taking me?" The man did not understand anything. "Did something happen to you?" "Your name is Douglas, isn't it? Please just follow me. It's hard for me to push you." Angela could hardly stand on her feet. They went into her apartment. "Here is my son, Sam. He's sleeping. I have no one to leave him with. I think I have appendicitis. The ambulance will take me away. Please stay." The pale woman groaned and crouched in pain. "Please stay with him. Here's my phone number." At that moment, a paramedic team arrived. They examined the sick woman and took her away to the hospital. Douglas was at a loss and did not understand what he should do now, alone with a small child in the woman's apartment. But then, having gathered his thoughts and checked on the boy, who was sleeping peacefully in his room, he settled down on the couch in the living room and dozed off. In the morning, Douglas awoke because someone was rubbing his sleeve. "Sir, who are you? Where is my mommy?" asked a little boy in funny pajamas. "Hi, you're Sam, right? I'm Douglas. Your mum got sick last night and asked me to look after you." "And we're not going to kindergarten?" asked the little boy with a sly smile. Douglas wondered. He didn't know what he should do with the toddler next. He had to go to work, and he could not be with the boy all day. Deciding that the best thing to do would be to ask the child's mother what to do next, he winked at Sam and said, "Let's go see your mother and find out what to do next. And by the way, where's your daddy, kid?" "He's lost somewhere." The boy shrugged his shoulders. "Mummy says he's never been here, but I know that that's not the truth. I wish he'd find me someday. By the way, are we going to have breakfast? Mom always gives me candy and juice for breakfast, and ice cream, of course," smiled the little boy again. "You're a sly one," Douglas grinned, and picking up the boy in his arms, went with him into the kitchen. Having finished with their breakfast, Douglas called to work and warned them that he would not be there today. Then he called Angela and found out which hospital she had been taken to. As it turned out, overnight, Angela was operated on, but now she was already in the ward and was happy to hear that her son was okay. A little later, Douglas and Sam visited Angela in the hospital. "Please forgive me, Douglas, but Mrs. Williams, who often looks after Sam, was not at home, and I was so confused that I started ringing all the doors. Only you opened." "No, it was me who was confused," smiled Douglas. "Just imagine, I am sleeping, not bothering anyone, and suddenly the doorbell rings, and you take me somewhere." Douglas laughed, and Angela embarrassedly smiled. So they chatted for another half hour, and when they were about to leave, Angela told Douglas where the kindergarten was and which apartment Mrs. Williams lived in. When Douglas and Sam left, Angela was still lying there thinking about what good and kind people there were in the world. In the evening, Douglas, having played with Sam in the toy cars, fed the child with supper, read him a fairy tale and put him to bed. Then he went into the kitchen for tea. Only now he remembered that he had put his phone on silent since the night before. Looking at the screen, he saw a bunch of missed calls and messages from his fiancé, Roxy. Douglas called back, and a hail of reproaches immediately fell on him. Roxy was crying and hysterical, suspecting Douglas of cheating. The man tried to explain everything to her, but Roxy did not believe him, refused to listen any further, and angrily hung up. Douglas felt guilty because they were going to the premiere of a new movie today, but he did not even remember it. After thinking about it, he decided that tomorrow he would definitely visit Roxy and apologize. But the next day, he failed. In the morning, he and Sam were almost late for kindergarten. Douglas's appearance was a surprise to the teacher. Then he hurried to work, and after it, he ran back to the kindergarten to pick up the child. Douglas lived such a cycle for several days. One evening, on his way home with the boy, he saw that the windows of Mrs. Williams's apartment were lit up. It meant that she had returned from the summer house. Douglas stopped outside the elderly woman's apartment and was about to press the bell, but stopped, thought for a while, and to his surprise, went to Angela's apartment. All these days, Roxy did not call Douglas, and when he dialed her, she hung up. And he also stopped calling, especially since the child was taking up all his spare time. So a whole week went by. Saturday morning, when Douglas and Sam were still asleep, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood Angela. "Hasn't Mrs. Williams arrived yet?" the young woman asked in surprise. "I don't know, I haven't seen her," said Douglas confusedly. "Yes, we managed ourselves. Your son is just a miracle. Please come in, I'll put the kettle on. We'll have tea now." Angela watched with a smile and with some pleasure as Douglas was managing her kitchen. Seeing her look, he understood everything and was embarrassed again. "You'll have to excuse me. I've gotten used to the place a little, almost like at home." When Angela was walking Douglas out of her apartment, they bumped into Roxy on the stairs. The woman came to her fiancé to make up, but when she saw him coming out of another woman's apartment in his pajamas, she went up to him, gave him a resounding slap, and ran out into the street in a rage. Douglas was embarrassed that Angela witnessed this unpleasant scene. He explained that he and Roxy were supposed to have a wedding soon, but by all appearances it will no longer take place. Feeling guilty, Angela wanted to help Douglas, so when she saw Roxy through the window the next day, heading for the entrance again, she waited for her on the stairs to talk. As it turned out, Roxy had come to finally break up with Douglas and return the ring to him, and Angela, not without difficulty, but still managed to explain everything to her. An hour later, Roxy and Douglas went to visit Angela, and a joyful Roxy invited her to the wedding. Only Douglas looked very sad for some reason. Angela thanked her for the invitation, but declined. She was still very weak after surgery. A few days passed. Angela saw neither Roxy nor Douglas, but when suddenly the doorbell rang, her heart treacherously fluttered. Angela opened it and was taken aback. On the threshold stood her failed mother-in-law. "Angela, what are you doing here?" goggled the woman's eyes. Angela stared at Mrs. Brown in shock and could not say anything. "I came to see my father. Where is he? Where is the owner of this apartment?" Recovering from her surprise, began to shout Mrs. Brown. Mrs. Williams came out at the noise. "Oh, it's you! Shameless! Remembered about your father? He's been in the grave for a long time, and fortunately you won't get the apartment. He bequeathed it to Angela, who's been looking after him all these years." Upon hearing this, the woman, clearly not very upset by the death of her father, began to shower curses on Angela, and leaving, promised to expose the swindler who seized her inheritance. Angela felt once more covered with mud, and in the evening her ex-fiancé Morgan came to her. He declared from the threshold that he would live here now, and she would have to get out of the apartment as soon as possible. "No, you are not going to live here," Angela said in an even voice. "What?" shouted Morgan angrily and raised his hand for a punch. Angela stepped back against the wall, but the blow didn't happen, and instead Morgan rolled out of the apartment. It was Douglas, who stealthily entered the apartment, grabbed Morgan, and threw him out onto the stairs. "If you ever come near Angela again, or if I see you near the house, I'll punish you," he threatened Morgan, and then returned to the apartment, where he immediately picked up Sam in his arms. "Hello, son. I missed you so much." "Are you really my daddy?" The little boy rounded his eyes. "Yes, a very real daddy. I didn't tell you right away because I was checking to see if you recognized me." "I did, Daddy. I knew right away. Mom, I told you that Dad will find us." "And what about Roxy, Douglas?" said Angela in confusion. "She'll find someone else, but I want to be with you. Will you marry me?" Angela nodded, and a happy smile lit up her face, and Douglas, hugging her and Sam, thought with relief that at last he was home.